there are breadcrumbs. There are people who have solved what you're stuck on, what you're trying to figure out. In marketing, whether that's customer acquisition or killer lead nurture program or better definition around brand voice. I mean, all these things have been solved, maybe not in your unique way, but they've all been solved before. And there are people who can help support and nudge and encourage. And those breadcrumbs are out there. That's where you kind of need to go to your trusted circle. Okay, so we are going to talk about getting unstuck. I think being stuck, pretty relatable. You ever been stuck, Bethany? I'm sure you've been stuck.
Absolutely.
All the time.
I think so. I mean, personally and professionally, which it all feeds together, doesn't it? But I think the most common feeling, if you were to say, what's the most common ground that we have with each other and with the leaders around us, we could all relate to that feeling. I call it the blinking cursor feeling, where you're staring at a computer screen and you're supposed to be writing something, but you're just kind of like blink in your head, or just not knowing how to move forward. And as we talk in just life, and especially in a creative space, we work in a creative agency, that feeling comes a lot of times where you're trying to deliver a product and how do you get those creative juices flowing? But just whatever space that our listeners find themselves in, I know that they can relate to, and I know that you can relate to, speaking to the listener, that feeling.
In the creative world, it's the blank page, right? That's where we often get stuck, but it's universal. This is a universal thing. And maybe we'll just make this a safe space today to talk about it a little bit, because I think when we were coming up with an idea for this episode, the reality is there's some really simple solutions to get unstuck, and they come across as simple, but you know what? Simplicity is the most welcome thing when everything feels complicated, right? And I think when you're stuck, things feel really complicated, don't they?
Absolutely. And I think that we often underestimate the amount of big rocks that we're all holding at one point. So for me, when I feel stuck, it might be showing up in one particular area, like I don't know how to move forward in one situation, but it often is caused by some other big rock that's actually taking up a lot of data in my head. So the simple things that we're going to talk about, that to your point, yes, they're simple, but they actually are quite significant. Some of those things are practices that we both try and that help us, that might be helpful for you today, whoever's listening, to be able to sit down with yourself and quickly reflect to say, how do I move forward? How do I evaluate all these things that feel quite complex, quite complicated? I call them big rocks. And how do I get them out of my head and get them into a place where I can start to move them around and do something more productive than just sitting here and swirling a little bit?
Number one segue straight from that would be identify the monster. What's the real issue here? And getting there, you often think the thing is the thing, but the thing is not the thing. Does that make any sense at all? Sometimes if you can relate this to the personal life, if you're having a little bit of a discussion with your spouse or your partner, and it's like there's an issue, or with your kid or whatever, and it's like, the thing that's in front of you is really not the underlying thing, right? There's really something else going on. And so to get to that, something that I've done before that I think works really well. People talk about journaling, and I think journaling is really what this is at the core, but it's something called a clarity brief. A clarity brief is grab a notepad, grab a pen. Imagine that you can spend 30 minutes by yourself in a quiet space with no technology, no phone, no screens, no people asking you questions, right? And sit in that space and just write everything that's on your mind, everything that's going through your head, good, bad, ugly, and don't overthink it. And what I'll find by doing a clarity brief is, and it may not be 30 minutes, you may be able to knock this out in 15 or 20 minutes, but sitting there and writing down everything that's in my head and then stepping back from it and rereading it, it's really interesting what bubbles up, and be able to go back and circle the things that really weren't the thing in the first place, and just getting clarity on what the monster is. What's the issue that is bubbling up that's at the core? And you have to allow yourself that time and space to do it.
Which is interesting. What just came as a light bulb in my head while you were talking is we work in advertising, so we write a brief to define the work ahead for us. Your exercise of writing a clarity brief is doing that in a sense for yourself, to say, what are you actually solving for? What's the issue at hand? Like we say that good brief has never met a stapler, just to boil down to say, what am I actually trying to solve for? And again, it might be the presenting issue, might be the thing that's making you realize that you're feeling stuck. But when you actually sit down and articulate that clarity brief, it's interesting interesting what starts to emerge. Using your strategic business mind that you apply every day at work, but applying it to yourself and starting to use those same skills that you have for everybody else. And how do you use them to benefit yourself?
We have three things. That's the first thing, is identify the monster. What would be the second thing?
Yeah, I'd say that the second thing for me is to control what I can. Looking for those things that are within my control. If you're drawing a circle right in front of you, I literally drew on this notepad right next to me. I wrote down a circle that says what I can control. And then I wrote a bigger circle that says what I cannot control. And even the serenity prayer is something I remember my counselor helped me focus on when I was making one of the biggest decisions of my life. She really helped me to see, it says, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change and courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference, right? And so to me, that second one of control what you can is wrapped up in that serenity prayer. That's kind of a universal prayer you're probably familiar with, but it is to say, okay, control what I can, take action on the things that I can directly influence with my energy. So I know that those might be things that my behaviors can influence, but then also to outline what are the things outside of your control that might be economic headwinds, or it might be, dynamics within your family that you may not be able to control. It might be your extended family, or just things, tensions, all the things. In that long list of things you can't control, there's always things within the list that you can, and that you might not realize until you sit down to do these deeper exercises to move you out of a place of feeling helpless or reactive, to move you into a place of feeling a sense of control and a sense of power more so, and to
I think
you.
That's really relatable. I mean, I can relate to that because I feel like when I do get stuck and I get in that headspace, you tend to wait for some external force to hit you over the head so you can move forward. Well, I need to wait for more input, right? Oh, we're waiting for research, or waiting for something. And that is a powerless feeling. It's nothing, not a space you want to be in. So you have to start somewhere. You have to.
I love that. And in business too, I know with us, we both are responsible for sales within our agency. And there's lots of factors that influence closing a deal, aren't there? And some of those factors you can control, some of them you cannot, but really keeping yourself in that leaning in posture where you're constantly kind of pushing on those factors that you can control to influence sales, to grow your business. It is common to get into that helpless place. I actually see it sometimes in other companies or other agencies where it has almost become a culture within their business of like, well, I don't know. I mean, if hopefully we'll grow, but they aren't necessarily pushing on the things that they can control and being diligent about those things because they haven't done the work to pick apart what are the factors that are influencing the growth of the business that are outside of their control and what is within their control. And I think for me, it's a stewardship thing of making sure I am diligently going after, driving forward all of the things that can be influenced by my energy.
Yeah, this is a good reminder for me, even sitting here talking about it, because it's all stuff obviously I know, but it's you can't be reminded enough of this. There's a quote that I love. It's one, I can't remember who said it, where it came from. Learn what is within your control and what is beyond your control. And surely what is within your control is your attitude towards what is beyond your control. So it's also just helps with your mindset too. Just really saying, hey, I'm not going to spend any energy there because I can't control that, right?
Yes.
I'm just going to focus on the area where I have influence. Third, something we talked about is just seeking help, seeking a mentor, a colleague, a friend, external feedback. And there's this book, you probably see it in the bookstores or on Amazon or something, but it's Never Eat Alone. And I think that kind of summarizes probably what all 250 pages of the book are about. But my wife will push me in that direction when I'm getting inside my own head a bit. And that is, she's like, go talk to someone. Maybe that's just her trying to get me out of the house. And not talk to her about it anymore. Right. What she means though is like there are breadcrumbs. There are people who have solved what you're stuck on, what you're trying to figure out. And in marketing, whether that's customer acquisition or killer lead nurture program or better definition around brand voice. I mean, all these things have been solved, maybe not in your unique way, but they've all been solved before. And there are people who can help support and nudge and encourage. And those breadcrumbs are out there. And so that's where you kind of need to go to your trusted circle. And I find that when I do that, sometimes there's some good ahas, and sometimes it's just the exercise and pulling out what might be in your head, but you haven't either articulated or agreed with yourself about. So getting some third-party validation and feedback, it's like you had the roadmap all along. You just needed a little bit of a nudge.
I'd love to know from you, when is a time in your own life that you felt stuck? And what did that look like? And how did you navigate that?
The thing that comes to mind for me is going to be in a point when I was experiencing burnout in this industry of advertising and marketing. And I was stuck in that I felt like I was either going to start my own thing or have my own company, my own culture, my own setting, or I was going to go off and become a boat builder. And I really have no idea how to shape a hull. And so I was like, okay, well then I don't know what else I'm going to go do, but I know I need to make a change. And I think everyone can relate to at some point in their career where they are feeling stuck and they're feeling burned out. And I think burnout is real. Burnout is huge. Yeah. And I think it goes back to some of the things we were just talking about. What did I do? I journaled. What did I do? I talked to people. What did I do? I focused on what's within my control, what's beyond my control, and really like going to the pros and the cons and what's the worst thing that could happen. I feel like my wife said that to me all the time. She's like, what's the worst thing that could happen? And I was like, well, we could be living under a bridge. Yeah. And she's like, okay, well, we can deal with that. We'll figure that out. Yeah. You know, I think that for me was a pivotal moment where I needed to dig deep. And then at some point you make an educated decision, but you still have to move forward. And that fear is powerful and that fear is motivating, but you have to just make the best decision you can with the information you have at that time. And at some point, that leap of faith. I know burnout is real for a lot of people and certainly in our industry too. It's a big deal.
What I find interesting about this topic is I read yesterday that Gen Z has learned about business on TikTok. Like they know the ins and outs. They're not fooled by corporate culture or the things that were fed a lot of times in jobs, right? When you showed up, you can relate to you being in your 20s and you're kind of just told, here's the culture, here's how it's going to be, like work first, people second, etc. Yeah. All of this stuff, I feel like Gen Z is like, BS, like time out, I ain't doing it, you know, and especially with like creator culture where we all have these resources now where we can kind of build our own thing from our couch or in my case, in my basement, like, if you want to. And so it's just pretty interesting because I feel like the generation coming up has options to build their future and feels empowered to build their future in a way that generations before maybe didn't. They're owning it. So I always talk about who is the future of work. We hear the bigger narrative around what is the future of work, but I don't often hear people talking about who is the future of work. And the reality is the future of work is these generations that are calling BS and that are saying, no, I want to have a life. I want to make money, but I also want to be happy and I want to flourish. And so I really don't think it's a Pollyanna view to say, I want to be a healthy, happy worker.
That's good. And I hope that continues to change. I even see it in my two daughters, 15 and 14, and they just kind of look at work and they kind of call BS on what they're supposed to do. And they're like, no, I'm going to do this. And how great, how liberating, how wonderful, because I felt like there was a path that right when I came out of college that I needed to go down and I was supposed to go down and you're expected. That's pretty cool chapter.
It's really cool because as leaders, we have the opportunity to build a space that allows people to bring their full self to work, essentially, like to not have to apologize for wanting to prioritize their health over everything or to prioritize that joyful feeling and actually to protect it, and to not be shamed for wanting that and to have boundaries and to be celebrated with their work-life boundaries, like to say, I need to close my laptop because I need to go to my workout class or XYZ. I think that the challenge to us is to create a space that the future of work wants to live in, that wants to come here because there's room for all of those feelings. They don't have to just go build an individual empire. They can still come to companies, but we just have to hold that responsibility to build a space that they want to be in.
Getting unstuck, we've all been there. We all need to do it at times. And when things are complicated, make it simple, right? Identify the monster. What's the real issue? Learn what's within your control and what you can't control and focus on the stuff you have influence over. And then lastly, seek help. Get a mentor, get a colleague, talk it out. Don't sit in your little bubble and sweat it out when you can meet with people who've been there and can help guide and help support.